Let me tell you about the day I accidentally started an interstellar incident and somehow came out ahead. The name's Commander Jake Morrison, though everyone calls me Tank, which is either a reference to my tactical brilliance or the fact that I tend to bulldoze through situations with all the finesse of a drunk rhinoceros. I prefer to think it's the former. My partner in this particular disaster was Vrex, a four-armed Zephyrian who looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with an anxiety disorder. Vrex had the unfortunate habit of overthinking everything, which made him the perfect complement to my habit of not thinking at all. We were on what Command generously called a routine diplomatic mission to the Krolix Empire. Our job was simple: negotiate mining rights for a titanium-rich asteroid belt and try not to start any wars. Naturally, I managed to screw up both objectives within the first hour. The trouble started during the formal dinner with Emperor Gorthak the Magnificently Tentacled. Now, I want to go on record saying that Krolix cuisine looks like something you'd scrape off a spaceship hull, but I was being diplomatic. I even complimented the Emperor's impressive collection of ceremonial weapons and his lovely palace decorations. But then the Emperor's third wife, Empress Squisara, made her grand entrance. Picture this: 12 feet of purple, undulating alien majesty, adorned with what I can only describe as the most elaborate tentacle arrangement I'd ever seen. It was clearly meant to be impressive, possibly even beautiful by Krolix standards. So naturally, I opened my mouth. "Wow, Your Majesty. That's quite a hairdo. Did you stick your finger in an electrical socket, or is that the new fashion?" The silence that followed was so profound I could hear Vrex's four hearts simultaneously having palpitations. The Empress turned a shade of purple that I'm pretty sure doesn't exist in nature, and the Emperor's own tentacles began writhing in what I was rapidly learning was not a good sign. Vrex, bless his panicked little alien soul, tried to salvage the situation. "What Commander Morrison means is that your magnificent cranial appendages are so striking they remind him of the divine lightning of his home-world storm gods." I've got to hand it to Vrex. The guy could spin diplomatic BS like a tornado. Unfortunately, the damage was done. Emperor Gorthak rose from his throne, all 14 feet of him, and pronounced in a voice like grinding metal that our diplomatic immunity was hereby revoked. "For insulting the sacred coiffure of my beloved third wife," he declared, "you will face trial by combat in the grand arena of eternal screaming." "Eternal screaming?" I whispered to Vrex as the guards confiscated our weapons. "That doesn't sound good." "Jake," Vrex replied, his voice higher than usual, on a scale of 1 to catastrophically doomed, "we are currently orbiting around spectacularly dead." And that's how we found ourselves being dragged through the palace corridors, past tapestries depicting various creative ways the Krolix had dispatched their enemies, toward what I was beginning to suspect would be a very short and very painful final chapter in my military career. The arena gates loomed ahead, and I could already hear the crowd roaring for blood. My blood, specifically. The grand arena of eternal screaming was exactly as advertised, and the screaming part anyway. I was still holding out hope that the eternal bit was just marketing hyperbole. The arena itself was your standard gladiatorial setup: massive stone circle, tiered seating packed with bloodthirsty spectators, and sand that had seen way too much action, if you know what I mean. What made it special was the opposition waiting for us in the center. 3 distinct groups of aliens, each representing a different flavor of violent death. On the left, we had the Brutok warriors, massive hulking brutes who looked like someone had crossed a gorilla with a steamroller and given it anger management issues. Each one stood about 8 feet tall and probably weighed as much as a small vehicle. In the center were the Shadowkin assassins, sleek and fast-moving creatures that seemed to phase in and out of visibility. They moved like liquid mercury and had more blades attached to their bodies than a Swiss Army knife convention. And on the right, the cybernetic collective drones, part machine, part organic nightmare, all business. They stood in perfect formation, their optical sensors tracking our every movement with the kind of precision that suggested they'd already calculated 17 different ways to kill us. "Jake," Rex said, his voice cracking slightly, I believe this would be an appropriate time to implement one of your famous backup plans. Backup plan? I said, trying to look confident while nursing my dislocated shoulder. Did I mention I'd dislocated my shoulder? Yeah, turns out Krolik's architecture isn't designed for human coordination. I'd gracefully tripped down the arena steps during our dramatic entrance. You know, Vrex continued, wringing all four of his hands simultaneously, one of those brilliant strategic contingencies you humans are always talking about. I looked around the arena, taking in our situation. No weapons, one injured human, one neurotic alien, facing off against 3 different species of professionally violent creatures, while thousands of spectators cheered for our imminent demise. Vrex, buddy, I said, rotating my shoulder and wincing. I think you're overestimating my planning abilities. The crowd was getting restless. I could hear bookmakers calling out odds, and from what I could understand of Krolik's numerical systems, we were apparently considered somewhere between laughably doomed and cosmic joke. 10,000 credits on the Brutok. Someone shouted. 5,000 on the Shadowkin to finish it in under a minute, came another voice. Anyone taking bets on the pink thing and the bug? This was followed by what I assumed was alien laughter. The Emperor stood up in his royal box, raising one tentacle for silence. Let the trial begin, he declared. May the strongest survive, and may the screaming be eternal. A horn sounded, and suddenly our opponents were moving. The Brutok charged like a freight train having a bad day. The Shadowkin disappeared into that creepy phase shift thing they do. The cybernetic collective spread out in a perfect tactical formation that probably had a name like Death Pattern Omega. And there we were, standing in the middle of it all like the punchline to a very expensive joke. Jake, Vrex said, his voice remarkably calm considering the circumstances. I just want you to know that despite your numerous character defects and complete disregard for basic survival instincts, it has been an honor serving with you. Save the eulogies, Vrex, I said, a grin spreading across my face as I watched our opponents approach. A class is now in session, and today's lesson is why you never, ever underestimate human stupidity. The Brutok were 50 feet away and closing fast. Time to get creative. You know what the problem is with most alien species? They're way too logical. They study human military tactics, learn our strategies and think they understand how we fight. What they don't realize is that our greatest weapon isn't our technology or our training, it's our complete willingness to do things that make absolutely no sense. I call it protocol chaos, and it's about to become these aliens' worst nightmare. Vrex, I said, still grinning as the Brutok thundered toward us. Remember that time you asked me why humans watch something called professional wrestling? Jake, this is hardly the time for cultural discussions. Oh, it's exactly the time. You see, professional wrestling taught us that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to make it so ridiculous that your opponent doesn't know how to respond. The lead Brutok was 30 feet away when I cupped my hands around my mouth and shouted at the top of my lungs, "Hey, you overgrown space apes. Your mother was a cargo freighter, and your father smelled of engine coolant." The Brutok skidded to a halt, looking confused. Apparently, interspecies trash talk wasn't covered in gladiator training. But I was just getting warmed up. And another thing, I continued, pointing at the largest Brutok with my good arm, I bet you can't even do the Macarena. What kind of warrior species can't do a simple earth dance? I started doing the Macarena, right there in the arena, with a dislocated shoulder. The crowd fell silent. Even the Shadowkin materialized just to stare at me in bewilderment. Jake, Vrex whispered urgently, what in the 7 hells of Arcturus are you doing? Psychological warfare, buddy. Watch and learn. I segued from the Macarena into what I generously called breakdancing, though it looked more like a seizure with rhythm. The Brutok were completely transfixed, their tiny brains apparently unable to process what they were seeing. Your turn, Vrex. Give them some of that traditional Zephyrian throat singing. I will not dignify this insanity by participating. Come on. It's working. Look at them. And it was working. The cybernetic collective had stopped their advance and were clearly running some kind of diagnostic, trying to determine if this was an attack pattern they'd encountered before. The Shadow King kept flickering in and out of visibility, as if they couldn't decide whether this was worth staying materialized for. But the Brutok were the best. Their leader, a particularly massive specimen with scars covering half his face, actually sat down and started scratching his head with one massive claw. That's when I noticed something interesting about the arena itself. The safety barriers that kept spectators from falling into the fighting pit weren't actually safety barriers at all. They were force field generators, and if my understanding of Krolik's technology was correct, they were powered by the same grid that ran the lighting and announcement systems. "Rex," I said, still gyrating like a maniac, "remember when you said humans were unpredictable because we don't think things through?" "Yes, and I stand by that assessment." "Well, you're half right. We don't think things through the way you aliens do, but we do notice things. Like the fact that this entire arena runs on a centralized power grid that probably hasn't been updated since the Kroliks discovered electricity." I started moving toward the arena wall, still dancing, still keeping our confused opponents distracted. "See that maintenance panel over there? The one with the blinking lights?" Rex followed my gaze. "Jake, please tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking." "Oh, I'm thinking exactly what you think I'm thinking. And in about 30 seconds, these aliens are going to learn why humans are the only species crazy enough to turn a gladiatorial arena into our own personal playground." The Brutok leader stood up, apparently having decided that enough was enough. The Shadowkin were beginning to move again, and the cybernetic collective had finished their analysis and were advancing in formation. Time for Phase 2 of Protocol Chaos. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you a massive tactical advantage. These aliens had written us off as comic relief, which meant they weren't paying attention to the really important stuff. Like the fact that I'd spent the last 5 minutes mapping every technical system in this arena while pretending to have a nervous breakdown through interpretive dance. "Rex," I said, dropping the dancing act and sprinting toward the maintenance panel, "remember when I asked you about your species' electromagnetic pulse ability?" "You mean the completely involuntary biological function that occurs when we're terrified?" Rex replied, keeping pace with me despite his obvious confusion. "That's the one. How terrified are you right now?" "And on a scale of 1 to existential crisis, I'm currently experiencing what my people call the Great Awakening of Cosmic Dread." "Perfect. Save that feeling." The Brutok had figured out that the dance party was over and were charging again. The Shadowkin had gone full stealth mode and were probably positioning for an ambush. The cybernetic collective were advancing with mechanical precision, their weapons systems powering up. I reached the maintenance panel and started pulling off access covers with my good hand. Krolik's engineering was surprisingly straightforward once you got past all the tentacle-friendly interfaces. Everything was color-coded, and the power distribution system was laid out like a textbook example of how not to design fail-safes. "Jake, whatever you're planning, please do it quickly," Rex called out, watching the Shadowkin ripple through the air toward us. "Already on it." I yanked out what looked like a primary control node and immediately heard several systems in the arena start to whine ominously. "You know what the beautiful thing about centralized power grids is, Rex? Enlighten me while we're being murdered. They're really, really easy to break." I grabbed another handful of components and started rewiring connections at random. The arena's lighting system began to flicker, and I could hear confused murmurs from the crowd. But the real genius was in what I wasn't breaking. See, while I was randomly destroying the arena's infrastructure, I was also being very selective about which systems stayed online. The announcement speakers, for instance, and the environmental controls that regulated atmospheric composition in the spectator areas. "Rex, I need you to get ready to do that electromagnetic pulse thing. I told you. It's involuntary. I can't just decide to do it. Trust me, in about 10 seconds, involuntary is going to be exactly what we need." That's when the first Shadowkin materialized right behind me, blade raised for a killing strike. I spun around, my dislocated shoulder screaming in protest, and found myself face to face with 8 feet of nightmare black alien death machine. "Hi there," I said cheerfully. "Guess what?" I yanked the last critical component out of the maintenance panel. Every light in the arena went out simultaneously. But that wasn't the best part. The best part was that the lights didn't just go out, they went into emergency strobe mode, cycling through the entire electromagnetic spectrum at roughly 15 flashes per second. Now, human eyes are adapted for a pretty narrow band of visible light. These alien species, not so much. The Brutok visual system was apparently designed for their homeworld's dim red star. The Shadowkin relied on some kind of enhanced spatial awareness that depended on consistent lighting. And the cybernetic collective's optical sensors were calibrated for optimal performance under standard arena conditions. None of them were expecting a rave. The Shadowkin assassin in front of me let out a sound like a tea kettle having an existential crisis and stumbled backward, clutching his head with all 6 arms. "Now would be good, Vrex," I shouted over the chaos. I looked over to see my partner standing perfectly still, all 4 arms spread wide, his compound eyes wide with terror as he watched Brutok warriors stumbling around like drunk giants while Shadowkin flickered in and out of visibility in complete confusion. "I have achieved maximum terror," he announced. And then every piece of electronic equipment in a 50-foot radius suddenly died as Vrex discharged enough electromagnetic energy to power a small city. The cybernetic collective drones dropped like rocks, their systems completely fried. Half the arena's remaining functional systems sparked and died. Even some of the spectators' personal devices started smoking. But I wasn't done yet. While our opponents were dealing with strobe light hell and electromagnetic death, I was busy accessing the arena's sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen," my voice boomed through the speakers, "welcome to the human show." And then I started playing music. Specifically, I started playing the most obnoxiously loud death metal I could find in my suit's personal files, mixed with what I remembered of Zephyrian mating calls from Vrex's cultural orientation briefings. If you've never heard the sweet sounds of Bloodstorm of the Apocalypse mixed with the romantic warbling of an amorous Zephyrian, trust me, you're not missing much. But as a weapon of mass confusion, it was absolutely perfect. The arena had descended into complete chaos, and we were just getting started. What happened next was 20 seconds of the most beautiful, terrifying, and completely insane tactical coordination in the history of interspecies warfare. I've replayed it in my head 1,000 times, and it still gives me chills. Second one. The strobe lights hit their peak intensity, cycling through wavelengths that apparently caused the Brutok to experience something equivalent to seasickness. 3 of them were on their knees, clutching their stomachs and making sounds like dying space whales. Second 2, Vrex's electromagnetic pulse finished propagating through the arena, and the last of the cybernetic collective units shut down permanently. 12 highly advanced killing machines reduced to very expensive paperweights in the span of a heartbeat. Second 3, my musical masterpiece reached its crescendo. The combination of death metal and Zephyrian mating calls creating a sonic nightmare that had even the spectators covering their ears. The Shadowkin, whose hearing was apparently far more sensitive than anyone realized, began flickering so rapidly they looked like broken holograms. Second 4, the arena's environmental systems, damaged by my enthusiastic rewiring, began venting steam from maintenance conduits all around the fighting pit. The temperature spiked 15 degrees in as many seconds, and visibility dropped to about 10 feet. Second 5, that's when I noticed the maintenance tunnels. See, every arena needs service access, and the Krolix had built theirs right into the wall structure. The entrance was hidden behind a decorative panel that looked like it was part of the architecture, but the steam had caused it to warp just enough to reveal the seam. Seconds 6 through 10, this is where Vrex proved that 4 million years of evolution had given the Zephyrians some pretty impressive reflexes. While I was discovering our escape route, he was dealing with a Shadowkin assassin who had managed to adapt to the chaos enough to attempt another attack. Vrex didn't fight the Shadowkin so much as he danced around it, using all 4 arms to redirect its strikes while staying just outside its reach. It was like watching a very anxious ballet performer fight a nightmare. Seconds 11 through 15, I got the maintenance panel open and confirmed that yes, we had a way out, and no, it probably wasn't going to collapse and kill us. Probably. Meanwhile, the remaining Brutok warriors had figured out that the source of their problems was the two small figures near the arena wall and were attempting to charge through the steam and chaos to reach us. They didn't make it very far. Turns out that when you're 8 feet tall and used to fighting in clear conditions, navigating a steam-filled obstacle course while suffering from alien equivalent of motion sickness is remarkably difficult. One of them ran straight into a support pillar. Another got tangled up in some kind of ceremonial banner that had fallen from the spectator section. Seconds 16 through 18. The final Shadowkin, apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of valor, began to retreat toward their side of the arena. But here's the thing about the cybernetic collective drones, even the ones that had been disabled by Vrex's electromagnetic pulse. They were still massive metal obstacles scattered around the arena floor. The retreating Shadowkin ran straight into one of them at full speed and went down in a tangle of limbs and what I can only assume were alien curse words. Seconds 19 and 20. Vrex and I looked at each other through the chaos steam and flashing lights. He had that expression that Zephyrians get when they're simultaneously impressed and horrified by something. I probably had the expression humans get when they've just pulled off something that should have been impossible. Vrex, I said, gesturing toward the maintenance tunnel, I believe our chariot awaits. Jake, he replied, I'm beginning to understand why your species conquered half the galaxy despite having the tactical subtlety of a supernova. We disappeared into the maintenance tunnel just as the arena's backup lighting system finally kicked in, illuminating a scene of absolute devastation. 3 different species of elite warriors, all of them lying in various states of confusion, defeat and technological malfunction, scattered around an arena that looked like it had been hit by a very specific and very weird natural disaster. The crowd was dead silent. Even Emperor Gorthak, the magnificently tentacled, was staring at the arena floor with what I can only describe as the expression of someone whose understanding of the universe has just been fundamentally challenged. 20 seconds. That's all it took to turn certain death into the most impressive escape in Krolik's history. And we weren't done yet. The maintenance tunnels under the arena were surprisingly comfortable, assuming you didn't mind the occasional blast of superheated steam, and the distant sound of very confused aliens trying to figure out what the hell had just happened to their perfectly organized death match. Jake, Vrex said, as we made our way through the tunnels toward what I hoped was the exit, I need you to explain something to me. Sure, buddy. What's on your mind? That entire sequence of events back there. The dancing, the rewiring, the electromagnetic pulse coordination, the musical psychological warfare, the environmental manipulation, and the perfectly timed escape. You're telling me that was all improvised? I paused at a junction in the tunnel, consulting the maintenance schematics I'd memorized during my quality time with the arena's control systems. Well, when you put it like that, it does sound pretty impressive. That's not an answer. Okay, fine. Maybe I had been paying attention to the arena layout from the moment we walked in, and maybe I did notice that their power grid was vulnerable, and possibly I remembered that your species has electromagnetic capabilities that could be tactically useful. Vrex stopped walking and stared at me with all 4 eyes. You mean this was actually planned? Planned is a strong word. Let's say I had observed certain possibilities and was prepared to improvise based on available resources. So when you told me you didn't have a backup plan, I said I didn't have a backup plan. I never said I didn't have any plans at all. We emerged from the maintenance tunnels into the arena's loading dock, where our confiscated ship was waiting under minimal guard. The guards, it turned out, had abandoned their posts to watch the gladiator match and were probably still trying to figure out why the arena sounded like a construction site having a nervous breakdown. 30 minutes later, we were back in space with full diplomatic pardons, a signed mining contract, and what Emperor Gorthak had insisted on calling a standing invitation to return for future entertainment purposes. You know, Vrex said, as he piloted us away from the Krolik's home world, there's something I still don't understand. Just one thing. I'm impressed. the Emperor. Instead of executing us for humiliating his warriors, he gave us everything we originally came to negotiate for, plus bonus mineral rights to 3 additional asteroid fields. I leaned back in my chair, finally allowing myself to relax now that we were safely out of Krolik's space. My shoulder was still killing me, but the medical bay had provided some excellent painkillers that were making everything feel wonderfully fuzzy around the edges. Vrex, my friend, that's the most important lesson about dealing with any species in the galaxy. Everyone loves a good show. Those Kroliks hadn't seen real entertainment in decades. Their gladiator matches were getting predictable, their warriors were getting complacent, and their crowds were getting bored. So you gave them chaos. I gave them something they'd never seen before. A completely unpredictable opponent who turned their own arena against their own fighters, using nothing but creativity and a willingness to do things that made no tactical sense whatsoever. Vrex was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Finally, he said, "Jake, I have to ask, the whole time we were down there, were you actually in control of the situation?" I reached into my jacket and pulled out a bag of what appeared to be Krolik's arena nachos. They were terrible, but they were also technically stolen from an alien emperor, which made them taste like victory. "Vrex," I said, crunching on a chip that tasted like salted cardboard. "The secret to human tactical thinking is that we're never really in control of anything. We just get very, very good at making it look like we meant to do whatever crazy thing just happened." "That," Vrex replied, "is the most terrifying thing you've ever said to me. Wait until you hear about the time I accidentally conquered a planet by sneezing during a peace negotiation. Please tell me you're joking." "Well," I said, settling in for the long trip home, "it's a funny story. See, it all started when I developed an allergy to Andromedan pollen. And that's how I learned that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to make sure nobody understands what kind of fight you're actually having. The Kroliks expected a gladiator match, so I gave them performance art. They wanted to see warriors, so I showed them chaos. 20 seconds of pure, beautiful, human chaos. Not bad for a day's work.